we welcome you into a very special edition of Nosebleeds, a live emergency episode, guys. I'm joined with Danny Scott, Mike Calamari, and it's not good news. That's why we're here. If there was good news, maybe we'd still be here, but unfortunately, we have the first cancellation of baseball games in 26 years, so we have a lot to talk about today. I'll quickly kick it to you, Danny. How are you doing, doing the best with this tough news?
Yeah, I'd be doing a lot better if we got the news that baseball was happening. However, not so much the case. There's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of news that I feel like is still yet to come about these negotiations and everything that's going on. But, I'm excited to be here, excited to talk. It sucks for us as fans. It's great for us as potential broadcasters that we get to talk about this stuff. But, other than that, I'm doing pretty all right.
Yeah, I think one of the hardest things about this past 24 hours is that there was hope at a certain point. I think last night, if you told us we'd be having this type of emergency episode, I'd be kind of surprised because it looked like things were trending in the right direction, which I know we're going to get to later, but it's just really unfortunate that we're already canceling games and we're just at the beginning of March, and I don't think any fan wants that to happen. I don't think the players want that to happen, but it's just an unfortunate situation, but I'm excited that we get to talk about it in depth.
It's almost like they tease us, right? Because if you do go back to yesterday, you really think that we're going for progress here. And, before we get into all that, 718-817-2750 is the number to call. We will be taking callers all throughout the night. We'll see, where this one takes us here. We don't really have a full direction, full plan here, but we know there is a ton to unpack. Last time Nosebleeds was live, the World Series just ended. Landscape of the sport is completely different since then. So I guess we'll just start with at the top, right? And what happens today is the 5 o'clock deadline that was imposed by the owners. It was supposed to be last night, officially hit. There was no deal. And so this lockout that now has gone 89 days, Danny, sees the first 2 series of the year officially canceled.
Yeah, and we were talking about this pre-show. This isn't a strike. It's not like 1994, where the players went on strike because they were unhappy. This is the owners locking the players out. They're telling the players, hey, we're not going to do anything until you guys agree with what we want. So canceling these first 2 series, a lot of people, like in 94, it was really seen as a player's issue. This is the player's fault. Hey, it's millionaires versus billionaires, and the millionaires, we're not very fond of them right now. Right now, if you're an MLB fan, you should be furious at the owners because the players have come out multiple times saying exactly what they want, saying how much they want to get a deal done. And we'll talk about it when we really get into the Manfred stuff. But they had 89 days to figure this out. And it comes down to the last 24 hours. They meet for over 16 hours yesterday and can't work out a deal.
Yeah, I think when you spend that much time together and you can't find a deal, and then you look at the deals, the best and final offer that the MLB proposed, and then the MLB Players Association's offer, it's not even close.
No,
and you're thinking,
if
you're in our situation, you're last night, you're on Twitter, you're scrolling your phone, and you're seeing all these positive messages on Twitter that they could be coming to a decision, and then you're seeing the reports by ESPN's Jeff Passan, and you're like, wow, they spent that much time in the room, and this is how far they are apart. And it leaves you with no hope if you're a fan that this is only the start of cancellations. It's tough to feel like this is the end. There's going to be more.
It's crazy. Twitter was electric yesterday. Like, I'm scrolling my timeline every 2 minutes, my phone battery just getting taken to the shed. Really, and it's positive message after positive message.
And for us Yankee fans, it will start talking about what free agents, if there was people that signed and you didn't know about it.
There was a legitimate conversation I think we had, like, what if we wake up and Carlos Correa is on the Yankees? Like,
yes.
I think we talked about that because who knows if these guys have agreed to deals. Before we get into all that, we do have a first caller. We're going to bring him in. Sam from Ireland. How are you doing today, my friend?
Sam from Ireland, that's all I get. Ryan, I thought we were closer than that, man.
My bad, man. It's been a while. Kind of forgetting who you are.
Yeah, I understand. Thanks for taking my call, guys. Obviously, I share your frustrations. Over the last 3 or 4 minutes, just listening to you guys talk, I've had kind of gather some of my thoughts, and overall, just incredibly disappointed. I'm so sad because I love the sport of baseball. And you talked about our last Nosebleeds podcast from the World Series. I love doing Nosebleeds as well. And the fact that obviously I'm glad to be on another edition here, but horrible circumstances to be on it. And who knows when the next one is going to be, because we don't even have a specific date on the season, obviously with games getting canceled and all that. So I'm overall just incredibly disappointed and sad because we've seen, I think, NFL is reaching new heights and getting even more popular, if that's even possible, because of how much that sport has grown. The NBA has taken off as a great sport. All of these sports, March Madness we have coming up, are really rising, and baseball seems to be doing the opposite. It's falling. And what do the owners do to prevent that? Go into this, canceling games and pushing the season back even further. It's just so heartbreaking to a sport that I love, a sport that I grew up playing, a sport that will always be important to me no matter what. Earlier today I was like, when I got the news, I'm thinking, oh, I'm swearing off baseball. I need to find a new number one sport. I'm sick of this sport. I can't do that. It's like I love this sport and I'm never not going to love it. But I totally understand people just losing interest. And I think the more you push back this season, the more people start to say, screw it. I don't really care anymore. I'm going to watch, all the other sports going on in the world. So just overall extremely disappointed and super frustrated with the news.
And Sam, I think you bring up a good point about everything else going on in the sports world. We're nearing the NBA playoffs soon. March Madness is around the corner. Baseball is not in the position to be having a lockout right now. They're already considered by many maybe the third or fourth sport in the market to watch, and it's a sport that's struggled to gain viewers. And when you're a sport that's not one of the top sports anymore as it was in the 60s and 70s, you can't afford to turn off more viewers. That being said, I don't think any of us in this room or maybe people listening are going to stop watching baseball. We're all going to come back and watch the game, but for the casual viewer, this is not something you want to see. Someone you're trying to attract to watch your sport, the lockout doesn't help you.
No, it does. I mean, it doesn't help you at all. You're totally right, Mike. I think it's almost sad because, like I was kind of saying there, to be honest, right now with the way that the owners and the commissioner is absolute clown. I'm sure you guys will get into it. Smiling on camera as he cancels games, absolutely ridiculous. It makes me so upset because I'm always going to watch, but I really don't want to. I'm so mad at baseball right now where I don't want to watch I don't want to give my support to Major League Baseball in any sort of way by watching games, even though I know I'm going to when the season eventually, hopefully happens. But it's just overall, super frustrating.
Yeah, Sam, I want to ask you one quick thing, but I think it's important what we're talking about because Rob Manfred said that it'd be a disaster if they canceled games. They called it a defensive lockout in order to ensure the safety of the season and every game get played. So that's already been a flop, right? Are there any ways you can see from a fan perspective, as you've kind of called into the show, that they can salvage this even with a cancellation of games?
I guess the only thing I could think of is getting something figured out soon, but that just doesn't seem possible because you guys mentioned the demands right now between the sides are so far apart. And they've had so much time to do this, which is why it's so confusing to me that, I don't understand. It doesn't make any sense to me. I'm not a master negotiator, but when one side is so far away from the other side in terms of demands on a number of different topics, on a number of different things, what are you talking about in these meetings? What is going on? It blows my mind. I think they need to find a solution. They need to find it fast. I don't think they're going to find it fast, though. It took this long. They're still kind of far away from each other, which makes me really pessimistic. I think games will happen this season, but I do think there's going to be more than, I guess Manfred canceled, the first 2 weeks. I think there's going to be more than that ending up being canceled by the time these guys get ramped up and ready to play. So I guess just finding a solution as soon as possible. But they're already, I think they're really starting to push their luck. MLB is really pushing their luck because, Mike, you mentioned it. They're not in a position to gamble with this idea of missing a ton of games. They're really not in that position. Baseball is declining. They need to generate new fans, and they are certainly pushing their luck. And it really hurts me because I want to see the sport succeed. I think there's a number of ways to make that possible, and I've talked about those before on Nosebleeds. But right now, I'm very pessimistic, guys, to be honest. Very pessimistic.
Yeah, you're right, Sam, and thank you so much. We really appreciate you joining the show. If you want to call in, 718-817-2750. We're going to shift now to our second call. We're going to go to Quiggs. Quiggs, what's going on, my man?
Hey guys, first of all, I just want to say I'm a big fan of the show, especially the intro. Shout out Nick DeLuca, basically the voice of Joe Buck and Jesus himself. I also want to do a quick shout out to Pat doing a lot of graphics, I think. His big day.
It's birthday.
So celebration for that. But really, it's a dark time for baseball. And that last guy you had on was a real Debbie Downer. I honestly think that, what gives me hope is we had a similar situation in 2020, obviously different circumstances, but with very uncertain times, you're trying to get, at least some sort of season in place. And there was a lot of labor disputes, between the ownership and the players. And everybody was saying, like, this is just the opener to, what will come once the CBA ends. Now we're past CBA. But do you think that, you can take anything from the negotiations they had in 2020 and apply them to now, or is this just completely different?
There's obviously going to be some things that are similar in any negotiation that the CBA has ever had. And with 2020, there was a lot of other stuff going on, obviously, with the COVID season. So I think there are some things. And I think the players have kind of learned a lot since that 94 strikeout. They've learned a little bit more of like what exactly they're looking for in these negotiations, and that they're not just going to play coy to the owners' kind of ideas and what the owners are exactly looking for. But with that being said, this is a little bit of a different situation because this is the owners telling the players like, hey, we're not going to let you boss us around. We're going to lock you out of baseball. We're not going to give you any money. And in Manfred's press conference, he came out and said like, hey, we are not going to pay you guys if you are not going to play. Obviously, there was some stuff in the players' press conference that they said they were going to fight for that. So there is a little bit of a difference between what happened this year or what's happening right now and what happened a couple seasons ago. But I don't think it's that far off where they haven't learned anything since then.
Yeah, I think when you look at, what 2020 was, it really was the catalyst for this because the disdain between the owners and the players, maybe it's always been there, but we saw it publicly because you go back there, they could have started games in June, guys. Like they did not need to start. I think it was July 31st, Yankees and Nationals played. They had a month to take the national spotlight from, the world, right? There was no other sports going on. Baseball was in the best position to get their season going, and because of the disagreements over prorated salaries, everything like that, they weren't able to do so. So I think that's really where it starts. Queeks, we thank you for calling in. We're going to shift now to our next caller. 718-817-2750 is the number if you want to join the conversation. We're going to go to Will Talent. Will, what do you have for us?
What's going on, guys? Danny, Mike, and Ryan. I just got to say, I got to be quite frank to start it off. I'm annoyed. I'm pissed off. This is just, it's going on way too long, guys. You said it, Ryan. 89 days. Are we joking? 89 days without any movement. I can't even call yesterday movement because of how far they didn't come far along at all. They said everything on Twitter about how there could have been a deal done today. They moved it to a 5 p.m. deadline, and nothing was done. It's just, Danny, you said it too. It's millionaires against billionaires, and you said also, you got to show a little sympathy for the players, and I do. It's tough to show full sympathy for both sides. How can we be so far apart in discussions when we had from December 2nd to square this away, and now it's like writing an essay the night it's due. We're cramming it in. We're changing the deadline. It's a shame, guys, and I'm just wondering your thoughts on how where does MLB go in terms of marketing? Because you're losing the younger generation, and the way you lose them is by not playing. How can you possibly expose the younger generations coming up to baseball if you don't play? So what do you guys think, and how do you guys think MLB rebounds from this in the coming years?
So, Will, real quick before I let Mike answer your question, the players came out and said that they have been ready to negotiate since before the lockout even started. It took 43 days for the owners to even offer the players anything in this. So that's the reason why I'm saying, I'm fully on the player side in this one. They are fighting for what they believe is fair for them. They're the ones that are out on the field. They're the ones that are risking, their potential health playing a sport. So the owners are just sitting back making billions of dollars.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much going on here, and like your question, Will, about how does the MLB rebound to this? How are they able to promote their game? And it's always been about promoting the best players in the game. I look back to a couple years ago when Tim Anderson led the AL in batting average, and I don't think many people knew who Tim Anderson was. And I think that's a big problem, is that there's not a lot of promotion to these players. When Max Scherzer was speaking at the podium during the Players Association press conference, I think that was one of the first times I've heard Max Scherzer talk, and I think that's just a product of the MLB not promoting their players well enough. And it's hard for the MLB owners to do that when they're nickel and diming these players. These are the players that are going to make your game, entice the next generation of fans to want to watch the sport, and then you're going to nickel and dime them. It's really tough for the situation. At the end of the day, what it tells us is that the owners don't really care. They don't really care about where the sport's going. We saw that in 2020 when they let us have a 60-game season. Everything going on in the world during COVID, it was a time for baseball to be the sport that people watch, to bring in fans in. That was their golden opportunity, and they passed it up because they were nickel and diming with the players. So that showed us right there that the owners didn't really care about promoting the sport. They're already making billions of dollars. They don't care about winning more fans over, and we're still seeing that now in this lockout. It's just really unfortunate, the state of the game. And I think back to something Jeff Passan said. If you took out the 1,200 players in the MLB and you exchange them for new players, the talent would be an immense drop-off. But if you exchange the 30 owners with regular businessmen, it's the same or it's better. And I think that's just your answer right there, that the fact that players aren't being treated as they should be. They have to be the ones promoting the game. That's how you expand this game. But the way the owners are treating them in these negotiations, it's just tough to think that they're going to be able to grow the game after this.
I completely agree with you there. In a certain way, if the owners actually shelled out a little bit more money to promote their players, to market them a little better, it's no surprise to anyone that follows the major three. I would say the major three: hockey, you say the major four, but it's really the major three in America between baseball, basketball, and football. There is no, baseball is clearly in last place in that argument. So for owners, just to start it off, they just need to promote them a little better. Because you look at all these apps, ESPN, Bleacher Report, whatever it is that you go on, 90% of the articles are about football and basketball. When I'm going on the ESPN app, I'm reading articles more so about football and basketball, and I don't even watch basketball that much. However, it's what gets promoted because it's such a bigger idea in America that, these are the major sports. So if the owners and MLB as a whole were to just promote their players a little bit, they don't even have to go exponentially, just a couple more $1 million a year, just to say, hey, Shohei Ohtani last year had one of the greatest seasons ever, and they promoted him a decent amount. And that got a lot of interest from fans. I was seeing it on Instagram, on Twitter all the time. There's a guy by the name of Mike Trout who's probably a top 3, maybe top best baseball player of all time. If you saw Mike Trout walking down the street, would you recognize him?
We would, but
we
90% of people wouldn't.
If you ask the general population that, before I let Ryan go, they wouldn't. I think that's the problem, just promoting your players. And it's not like football. These guys aren't wearing helmets. And I think that regular people can tell football players better than they can tell baseball players, and that's something that's not good.
If you saw Tom Brady walking down the street, I'd argue that at least probably 75%.
I wouldn't say Tom Brady's a good example. I understand you're comparing him to Mike Trout, but Tom Brady's the greatest player in football history, probably.
I think there's an argument that Mike Trout is the best player in baseball history.
Yeah,
That's
a different argument.
The point still stands, and a stat that backs it up. The last 4 months, I saw this on Twitter. There have been more posts on SportsCenter about Euphoria, that show, than baseball. The last 4 months, since the lockout or whatever that is, that's insane.
The biggest news in Major League Baseball since 2020.
Yeah.
Since the COVID season happened, the biggest news, and there's been more posts. I think I saw the same tweet. There was more posts about Taylor Swift than Major League Baseball.
It's absurd. And something, going back to more the big picture here about this that we talked about is the owners, not willing to really go out and make this thing a deal. And there was a clip, it's the most viral, I think, sound clip from Rob Manfred's press conference, and we'll go more into it later, but they asked him because, there were 43 days, as we've kind of alluded to, this date where there were no proposals from baseball, and they asked Rob Manfred why there was really no urgency in that span.
Hey, Rob, understanding that deadlines create urgency, you locked out the players to jumpstart the negotiations. It feels like real bargaining went on just in the last 24 to 36 hours. I'm sure people are wondering why not over the last three months or even longer to get to a point where you're not necessarily canceling games because there's some momentum here.
Yeah, I think the best answer to that question is the last 10 days. We've been here ready to bargain, full committees, owners, players for 10 days, and it got going 2 days before the deadline. That's the best explanation I can give you.
I mean, what are we doing, guys? Like, what is Rob Manfred saying there?
Yeah, I mean, when you get asked why weren't you talking for the past 3 months when the lockout began, and your response is, look at the past 10 days, well, what about the other 80 days that you didn't talk?
What about the last year? They didn't have. They could have started
They
negotiating.
knew this was coming up.
They knew the collective bargaining agreement ended on December 1st, 2021. They could have been talking about it. And in the players' conference, they said, we sent over some stuff. We've been trying. However, they had not heard from Major League Baseball. And then as soon as the lockout initiates, they don't hear from them for over a month.
Yeah, and my response to that is it's almost like the owners wanted to cancel games to push the players to just feed more into there. If they're arguing, if they're discussing them in December and they're making negotiations in December, the owners don't have as much leverage. Now they have all the leverage because they're canceling games and they're threatening canceling more. And I'll bring it back to my other point. I think Will called in with a great question. The owners don't really care about the game that much, and that's sad. And Danny, you mentioned baseball's third in sports. You can make the argument they're fifth with behind college basketball and behind college football if you really want to go down the leagues. And with March Madness going on and baseball is not going to be getting things going, it's really sad that we're in this position.
I mean, as of right now, baseball is dead last.
Yeah,
because they're not playing.
And there's a list of teams, and we can go now more into the specifics of this last 10 days, and you look at why this is, we're talking about owners not caring. It's not fair, I think, to group them all. Like Steve Cohen cares about winning, right? But you look at these group of teams: the Pirates, the Orioles, the Guardians, the Marlins, the A's, Rockies, Tigers, Royals, Twins, D-backs. None of those teams the last 40 years have shown any willingness to really compete. And you just need 8 of them to not agree to some of these measures, and you're going to have a stalemate. And that's exactly what's happened. And so that's something you need to address in its own right, because when you're having these, these guys, these owners, they're running businesses. They're not seeing it as baseball, and I think that's where you get a lot of a disconnect between the fans and owners.
And I think something about that is when you look at one of the things that they were discussing with the proposed playoff format, they wanted to expand it to 14 teams, which would just give less incentive for teams to try, because you can get lucky one season and go 500
the Marlins
and sneak
in
into
2020.
You can sneak into the playoffs, and then owners are getting 100% of the TV revenue.
Yep.
So that's why they want the playoff format. And then Rob Manfred has the audacity to go in the press conference to say, we listened to the fans. We wanted to give them more exciting playoff baseball. If you went on Twitter when that was announced that the 14 team was a possibility, I couldn't find one person who liked that idea. And I think the 12 team, I'm fine with it if the 12 team is settled on, but 162 games is way too many to be a 500 ball club and get into the playoffs. And we already see that sometimes when there's really bad divisions, teams that are barely above 500 get in. I can only imagine if that. Now that it's a 14 team, if you're a really bad ball club and you're just under 500 and you still get in, it's just insane that's just another example of, in my opinion, a lot of the owners just wanting to not compete, not spend, and still get money from playoff TV revenue.
There's a reason why baseball plays so many games. It's so they weed out the bad teams. So let's just say I may piss off a lot of New Yorkers right now, and I'm sorry if I do that. Let's just say you're the Mets. Let's say the Mets go 500 this year, and then you got a pitching staff that consists of Jacob deGrom and Max Scherzer. You throw those two in a 3-game series, you're winning both games, and you're moving on to the next round of the playoffs. Let's say you get those those two in a 5-game series, you pitch those two in the first 2 games, then you have an exponential lead going in for the rest of the series. So, this 14-team playoff is absolutely ridiculous to me. If you're a true MLB fan, you understand why it's a 10-team playoff, why that makes sense for the game of baseball.
Yeah, and here's the beauty about baseball, right? It's 162 and it's 10 teams. The NBA, there are bad teams in the playoffs all the time. The beauty about the regular season in baseball is because there's so many games, a lot of casual people just don't like that. But the true fan understands that with the limit on playoff teams, the games do matter. If you were having 14 teams in the playoffs, it doesn't matter. Last year, the Reds and Phillies would have made the playoffs in this format. 82 and 80. Those were not playoff teams. You watch them over 160-plus games. Nothing about the eye test told you. Nothing about the record told you. Those teams deserve to make the playoffs. It's a clear money grab from the owners. And to spin it, Rob Manfred, to say that this is what fans want when there's no, he does a good job at really, getting the fans to come together, but it's always just against him and his exact point, and it's really doing the opposite of what he is saying.
One thing that you just brought up, the Reds at 82 and 80, or 80 and 82, or 82 and 80.
One or the other.
Whatever, a 500 team. You guys can see my hat right now, and you guys both well know I'm a San Francisco Giants fan. The 2 best teams met in the first round of the playoffs last year, and it was one of the best series I had ever seen. It was a historic series, and that made the game of baseball fun. I remember sitting in our dorm room, watching it with a group of people, and just being absolutely shattered and upset after the series ended. However, it was an amazing series, and that shows you why the 10-game series makes a lot of sense, because it breeds great games and great competition.
Yeah, so we're going to get more into that and kind of the other big issues at hand in a minute. 718-817-2750 is the number to call. We do have another caller. It's Sweet Lou Orlando. Lou, what's happening, my guy?
What's going on, guys? You're killing it. Yeah, I'm so upset that even the 6 games are canceled, because I think, look at baseball. It's a sport that goes out of its way to connect itself to the history, to the records, and for good reason, because look at the history of the game. Babe Ruth home runs after the Black Sox scandal, or the McGuire-Sosa home run chase a few years after the strike. Records have been such a huge part of the sport. To even take 6 games away, a week can change a whole lot in baseball. So it's shooting itself in the foot. You take away those great record-breaking moments, the opportunity for those moments to happen.
Yeah, and I think you talk about records. Think about the Ohtani season. If we didn't have 162 games of baseball, a huge part of that was the ERA and then also the home run chase. There was a time in that season where he was, I think around the All-Star break.
He's on pace for 65 homers.
Yeah, and you take away the records, you take away the excitement out of the game, and that was lost in a lot of 60 games. Another thing, Lou, that I'll bring up to you, I want to see what you think about this, is that you also lose what people would say a legitimacy of the season. The 60-game season, you may call it a Mickey Mouse season. People don't really think it's real.
Trevor Bauer himself calls his Cy Young a Mickey Mouse Cy Young.
Yeah, so I'm not sure we believe in Trevor Bauer, but I still think that I still think that 60 games is not enough for regular season. Lou, I'll get your thoughts on this. What does that say about the season? Not only the records, but the fact that we have a 112-game season, let's say. Are people going to, at the end of the day, be happy with that and crown a champion and be, that was a rightful champion?
Yeah, I think especially because, right, that 162-game season, it's been in place for so long at this point that it's a number that you know off the top of your head, and you constantly go to, and you take away any amount of games, you're diminishing that. If someone hits above 400 for the first time since 1941 and tries to do the Ted Williams, right, you can't look at it the same way. It's not 62 games, right? So you're absolutely right, and I think you take away the opportunity for those moments. That's one of the best things baseball has to offer, because breaking records in baseball, it's been more special than in the NFL, where the passing record might get broken every couple of years the way the game's changing. So records in baseball are special. You take that away, that's one of the few appeals in baseball that I think can really get national attention.
For sure, Lou, and thanks for calling in. And guys, when you factor in, we're just a year away from that 60-game season, right? So this is 2 of the last 3 seasons now where, I think in the 60-game season in the moment, we really wanted to believe it was real because it was the only thing we had. But I think when everyone looks back with an objective lens, you do realize there's a lot of kind of things that are wary. So 2 out of 3 years where you have this conversation, I think it's just detrimental to the sport as a whole.
And as a Yankee fan personally, watching them in the playoffs during the 60-game season, as much as you wanted them to win, I remember when they lost, we were like, Mickey Mouse season. There's part of that. And obviously, you want to be the Dodgers. You want to win, even though it's, 2020 shortened season, but it felt so much real for the Braves to win. And it felt so much more heartbreaking as a Yankee fan when you lost against the Red Sox in that, one-game wild card. So when you lose games, you lose a little bit of the season and what feels like a good season. And it's just hard to believe that at this point, if any, 154 games used to be the regular season for, most of baseball's history. And that felt like a real season. I think that eventually the baseball will bring it back down there. But anything lower than like 140, in my opinion, starts to get to the point where, are the seedings real? Are we crowning a real champion? Because so much happens in the last 20 games of a baseball season that changes where people fall, if you're a winner of division or if you're a wild card or if you're out of the playoffs, that if it's less than 140 games, it's tough to believe this is a season that's like a believable one in the history books.
Yeah, and Mike, you bring up a really good point. Like I said, Giants fan. So my friends that are Dodgers fans, they won the World Series in 2020. I don't let them forget that season doesn't count.
Good. Yeah.
I refuse to. Last year when the Giants lost, it was absolute heartbreaking. Everything was just really down in the dumps for a little while. However, you bring up this idea that, like, what is that number of games where we go, okay, this season actually counts towards the record books. There's no asterisks by the World Series winner. There's no asterisks by the Cy Young winners. There's no asterisks by the MVP winners, Rookie of the Years, whatever award it is. And I think around 140 is probably a decent number. If we get over 140 games this year, I think MLB fans are going to be very
like
happy.
a win times infinity, because I think that
I
know I said it, but I think we're starting to get to the point where we're going to be below 140, right?
And even right now, like, it stinks, 156. You think, like, 3 years ago, Giancarlo Stanton, the MVP in 2017, he's chasing Roger Maris. He's chasing that 60 homers. He had 59 going into the last game of the year. Well, now you take away 6 games where he could do that, right?
Yeah.
With just these cancellation. And that's, an element that we'll get to later, because there is now a new conversation that has to be had, right? This now, will we get these games rescheduled? The Players Union adamant we will. Rob Manfred today said we won't. So that just adds another layer to the argument. And I think that's where we should shift this now, because we've talked about the playoff, right? The 12 to 14. That was the big discussion last night. And today we got kind of the 3 major things that they are going back and forth with. We got final offer. It was, said to be the last best offer that the MLB could offer. So we'll go over that. We'll go over the MLBPAs right now. So in the owners and the leagues statement, they put no changes to the competitive balance tax. It's $220 million for the next 3 years, then $224, then $230. A $5 million increase in bonus pool money for pre-arbitration players, and then the increase in the minimum salary from $675K to $700K, which increases $10,000 a year after that. And before we get into the MLBPA's offer, when I saw this originally, I thought maybe there was hope they'd be close, before seeing what the players had to say. But after seeing that, we knew how far apart they were.
Yeah, and when you look at the players, should I give it a read right now with the players?
You could do it, sure.
Yeah, so I mean, the for the collective bargaining tax, it was the players wanted $18 million more on the original, and then they want to increase about $6 million per year after that. So that's a wide margin from the $220 and no increase for that the owners offered. And then the big other one is the pre-arbitration bonus pool. The players want $85 million with $5 million annual increase versus the owners, which was $25 million to $30 million. So it's like not even close there. You're making up $60 million. It's way too much. I think they're close on the minimum salary. Players want $725,000. Owners have it at $700,000 right now. So you feel like there could be something there. Players also want a $20K per year increase versus the $10K. So when you compare those two, it's like, Ryan, it's like, wow, they're not even close.
Yeah, and I'll throw you one better, because the minimum salaries, in a vacuum looks like it is in the right direction, because that's only a, $50K difference, whatever. But if you go back at the last 9 CBAs, this increase, whatever it is, it's $100,000, I think, from last season, $575K to $700K. It would be, out of the 9 last CBAs, just the 6th largest increase. So that's 5 CBAs that had a bigger minimum salary increase. So even though you think that is what's closest, you look in terms of what we've seen in the past, and it's still another area they really need to negotiate.
Yeah, it's a place that I think is biggest, because I think for the everyday ball player that's not getting top money, you want them to get that money the floor as high as they can, because no amount of years is justified or given in the MLB with the farm system and everything, injuries. You're not guaranteed so many years, and I think the minimum salary is definitely something that needs to be raised. But I think when you look at the other two, they're so far off. I mean, I encourage anyone listening or watching right now to look it up, because it's probably easier to visualize it and look at it on paper than the way we're describing it. But if you have something to take away, collective bargaining tax, they're about 18 whatever million away, a difference on that. And then the pre-arbitration bonus is about 60 million. So those are large numbers versus the minimum salary, which is only about 25K. But I think they'll find that one. But it's the other two they're way off on.
So with the minimum salary, we say they're not that far off. Since the last collective bargaining agreement in 2017, the average player salary has dropped 7%. The median salary of Major League Baseball players has dropped 30%. So I don't think, we say they're not that far off. MLB, the Players Association, also wants a $20,000 increase per year. MLB only wants a $10,000. So, this whole idea is like, hey, we're just looking out for our guys right now. The last season, over 2/3 of Major League Baseball players had contracts under $1 million. So we say it's millionaires versus billionaires. Yes, the millionaires of Major League Baseball are the ones that are arguing for it right now, but they're fighting for the guys that are at these lower levels that they're trying to help out. And that's with the arbitration and the competitive bargaining tax. They're just trying to make the game more competitive. There were a couple of things that Manfred said they had agreed upon, the universal DH. Personally, I don't like that, but
I don't
I'm a
see how
National League guy.
It doesn't move.
But
we can separate that. It doesn't move the needle in terms of the finances.
Yeah, no. Though
and I think both sides want the universal DH. I don't think that was a problem. And I think I don't want to cut you off, Danny, but one thing I say about that is that I feel like the playoff format agreement, the universal DH, the shift changes, those were easy agreements. At the end of the day, the big problem is the dollars and cents. Like, Manfred could say, we gave him the universal DH. We gave him the shift changes.
That's how he phrases it.
Yes, we gave him the 12 team. That's how he puts it. I think you wanted the universal DH one. And how much do you care about the shift? At the end of the day,
the only person that cares about the shift is
not making
Joey
you
Gallo.
money. It's going to come down to dollars and cents.
The shift is not a $60 million difference between the lowest played.
Yeah, and Manfred wants to shape the narrative we're giving you stuff. We're giving you stuff.
Exactly.
You're not giving them money. And at the end of the day, that's what's ruling this business.
That was going to be my final point. But one other thing that I had forgot about that I know was a player's big thing was a draft lottery. To make the games more competitive, that almost essentially eliminates tanking as a winning strategy for baseball. However, he doesn't exactly give us what he was saying in that. He said we're going to have the most competitive draft lottery of any of the major sports. What does that mean? Is that bigger than the NBA's draft lottery? I think.
I think one thing with that, the draft lottery, if you really wanted to make tanking. I think if you really wanted to make the league competitive, you would have an international draft. I think that's something
they said they were going to, or if they don't already have one, I can't remember, they were going to implement one.
But yeah, that's a different discussion.
There's a lot of things there, and I think another thing before, I want to get into the collective, I want to get into the CBT for a second, the tax. But before we do that, the service manipulation, I think, is another really interesting conversation. We were talking about Chris Bryant today, how he was sent down to get an extra year of eligibility. That's an absurd stuff by the management, and that is something where I think the players really are hanging their hats on, because there's so many examples of players just getting manipulated, not getting their chances in the MLB in order to get an extra year. And I think that is something they need to stay on their ground with to get rid of.
Manfred came out and said the players that finished first and second are going to, in Rookie of the Year voting, are going to get a year of service time regardless of how many games they played.
So that's
the 4 players a year that played the best. So you might as well call that the Chris Bryant rule. That helps, the top guys. Where I think what the players are really fighting for right now is the lower level guys and the middle guys. These guys that, and with the middle guys, they're getting kicked out of baseball at a much more rapid rate than we've seen in previous years. You're not going to get any of these guys that, stick around for 8-9 years because they're a 260 hitter and maybe hit 15 home runs a year for you. They're going to, these MLB owners are going to take a chance on this 18-year-old kid that just got drafted because he's a lot cheaper than a potential guy that's going to hit 15 home runs.
Well, I think that was a big thing with these like middle of the road guys that like just can't find spots. That's been a big thing. I think it was Dallas Keuchel has been a guy in the past that like could not find a landing spot. A lot of these older guys that are exiting their prime kind of, but still looking for like
and still
money that
above
merits,
average MLB guys.
Yeah, and they are guys that are having trouble finding landing spots, and I think that's part of the reason why you need to up this collective bargaining tax to make it more emphasis on spending money. So if you're the Yankees, the reason why they're not spending money in some instances is because they don't want to go over the tax. Or some of these smaller teams that, don't want to spend it and have to pay a taxes they don't want to afford. I think that's part of the problem. And it's annoying that, when you have less of a collective bargaining tax, you emphasize tanking more.
And I think that is the number one thing. Like going into maybe a year back, it's the one thing they wanted to improve, right? Was that because it's acting as a de facto salary cap. You go back 2 years ago, the Red Sox traded Mookie Betts, a Hall of Fame talent, to get under this salary tax. There is no instance, and the Red Sox are a large market team where a team should be trading their best homegrown, hitter since Ted Williams, since the 60s we're talking about, just to get under a number.
Well, the flip side of that is that you trade Mookie Betts and then you have a year where you're not so good, but you make the playoffs again with a new guy, with new Alex Verdugo.
Yeah, but
young core now.
With Mookie Betts, they go and win a World Series and are competing for a World Series every year. Would you say the Red Sox right now are a World Series competitor? Yes, they're a very good team. Yes, they're a playoff team. But I wouldn't classify them as the same as the Yankees or the Dodgers or the Astros or the Rays right now.
I think
that are vying for a World Series year in, year out.
I think for the owners, though, like the playoff TV revenue matters the most. And if they realize they can underspend and still make the playoffs, then I think that is enough for them, and they look at the Red Sox as an example of that. And let's not act like, the Braves don't have an insanely high payroll. Like, there are teams that get into the playoffs without a huge payroll. And I think when you look at the Dodgers, how much success have they had with how much have they spent? I think those are certain messages.
They won a World Series.
They did get the title. And here's
they have underperformed given their roster.
But they've made it to 3 straight NLCS and won a World Series. I don't think that's underperforming.
They won 11 straight divisions. But here's an example on a different scale than Mookie Betts. How about Francisco Lindor? Because this is a real example of why it is not set up right for the small market teams. They knew for 3+ years he wasn't re-signing, right? They came out and said after like his 3rd year they couldn't come to an agreement. That was it. Then, the Indian fans, now Guardian fans at the time, had to suffer through 2 years of having fantastic Francisco Lindor, knowing that was it. That is something where in baseball, in any sport, it shouldn't be the case, especially when the guy didn't even want out. He just wanted his money, and I think you look at, with this acting as a salary tax, the Indians there's no floor, so they have no incentive to spend and keep a Lindor. And when you put a tax, it hurts the guys at the top, like the Yankees, like the teams that aren't willing to go above, like the Red Sox, because now you're kind of those middle guys, as we talk about, like those are the guys that end up getting squeezed out. Francisco Lindor is always going to get paid. It's the middle guys now. You look at the guys that are still free agents. You have just a few top-level guys. Then you have your Anthony Rizzos, right? Your middle-of-the-pack guys where if there's not a clear fit on a team that's trying to compete, it's going to be tough to get these low-market teams to spend, and the teams at the top don't have any money to do so.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem why the owners are kind of nickel and diming the players, and they don't have that much wiggle room is, although the Mets can afford to pay these big-time salaries and the Dodgers can, there are those small market teams that can't shell out the big dollars, and then when you're raising the minimum salary and you're made the pre-arbitration bonus, you want to raise that too. For them, it's like I'm gonna have to pay the worst player more money because Max Scherzer's, the Francisco Lindors, the Bryce Harpers are driving up the market. That the market's being controlled by 10 or 15 best players in baseball, and that's affecting the entire MLB. And I think we're getting at maybe a bigger problem in baseball and how it's not like other leagues where, like in the NBA, you're not, when you're signing LeBron James, it's not a bidding war almost. And I think that's a problem with how the MLB is structured. The fact that Max Scherzer can get the money he did. I'm not credit to Scherzer, he deserves it. He's a phenomenal pitcher, but it does affect the market.
Yeah, and before I get into that, that's the story of the Oakland Athletics, which you just brought up. They get these big players. They breed these players that are good players. Right now we're seeing it happen with Matt Olson and Matt Chapman. Recently it just happened with why is his name blanking me? Josh Donaldson and Cespedes. These players that are just great players, but they just will refuse to sign them.
And that's one of 10 teams like that has these examples.
Yes, exactly.
Tampa Bay Rays.
Yeah, Andrew McCutchen and the Pirates. These and Evan Longoria got traded to the Giants. MLB needs to figure something out with, I think there was an argument that I saw that there should be a minimum salary. You have to spend over $100 million per year. And with the free agents and everything, it takes 6 years for these guys to become free agents. I don't think that's fair to them.
I think
the maximum contract that you can sign in basketball is 4 years, and then you get a fifth-year player or team option. With MLB, it takes you 6 years before you're going to be able to make money. So unless you're like a Bryce Harper, unless you're like a Manny Machado, where you come up at the age of 20 and then by 26, then you're finally eligible for your first contract. Those are the guys that are getting the big bucks. If you're a guy like Aaron Judge right now, who came up at 26, he's not going to see his first free agency till he's 32. How is that fair to Judge? He's been one of the best players in baseball, but we're not going to see him make this 10-year, $300 million contract because the Yankees aren't going to want to pay him $30 million a year till he's 42.
Yeah, I think it's a bigger problem. And Ryan, I want to see what you think about this. With the NBA, you get the salary cap, so you've got to spend this money that you have in every offseason. We've seen that with the problem with some teams who try to wait on the big buy and they still got to spend this money. But then it also allows you not to spend overly on this one player, and it kind of evens it out among all the teams. I mean, do you see that trending for the MLB, that there could eventually get to that point? I know maybe it's a long way down the road, but when you have people can constantly inflate the market, we're going to keep getting situations like this.
I think that's what the players want, and I think a guy you look at is Steve Cohen, and this isn't an original thought of mine, but he's terrifying 29 other owners because he is willing to spend every single dollar. He's richer than every owner by 10 times. He's willing to go significantly above any type of threshold, pay all the fines he can, and that just resets the market for other players. So I think, the players will be fine with that as long as teams are spending money. It's just you only have that top team that's really willing to go above that. So I think that's where you get in these kind of arguments here. And, if you want to call, we're going to keep taking callers here, 718-817-2750. We do have John on the line. John, what is going on?
Hi, I just want to say, I'm a big fan. Love listening to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, but I was just wondering, so do you ever see, I always kind of think of the NFL as kind of the ultimate, balance-wise. Small market teams can do anything. Teams can turn themselves around. Do you ever see, a really hard-set salary cap, sort of I don't know, I don't really know how the NFL does it, but it's sort of redistribution where, all teams have, a really genuine, even chance to sign a big target free agent?
Yeah, I'll go first. I know Danny has something to say. I think the NFL is a great model in that because you have the best, examples of worst to first. I also think a lot of that has to do with, your shell life in football is not that long, so your windows are tighter. And if you get a guy like a quarterback, obviously means so much more than just a stud center fielder. But I think the reason is these owners, because of the way these deals are set up, they don't have an incentive to spend money. They don't have to win to make money. And so you see a lot of these teams, they're still profiting without putting the dollars on the field. So it really doesn't give them an incentive if they don't truly care about the sport of baseball to try to make their team better.
We were talking about this earlier, and with a redistribution of wealth, I despise that idea for baseball. Because you look at these teams that have been good forever. The Yankees, the Red Sox, the Dodgers. I think you could classify my Giants in that. They have been good for a long time. So that's how they are able to keep gaining wealth and stuff. So if you do a redistribution of wealth, then you get a team that's, I think, pretty unanimously the worst team in baseball, like the Marlins, maybe like the Orioles. Maybe you want to go play in Miami because it's warm. LeBron wanted to go to South Beach when he was a free agent because it's nice in Florida. So if you're an MLB player, are you going, okay, well, I can go make the same money in Minnesota or I can go make the same amount of money in Miami? What's your decision going to be on that? Obviously, 10 times out of 10, you're going to say, oh, I'm going to go play for Miami where I can make the same amount of money and live in a nice place. That's why Tom Brady left Boston. And I think the redistribution of wealth, sure, it's a great idea in theory. However, it disrupts the history of baseball and the history, and like Lou Orlando said, the records and everything. It just completely alters baseball history that has been the longest sport that we've had tenured in America.
Yeah, well, my counter argument to that is just because you redistribute the wealth doesn't mean the Yankees lose their 27 rings.
I'm not saying no. I'm not
So-
saying the Yankees, but okay, let's say a team that's been historically good, like the Phillies. Would you rather play in Philadelphia or would you rather play in Miami? If the complete market is completely fair, you're going to get the same amount of money. You're going to get a 10-year, $300 million contract. Are you going to play in Philadelphia or are you going to play in Miami?
Yeah, I think that's part of it, but I think at the end of the day, no matter what, Miami will always be Miami and Philadelphia will always be Philadelphia. Players who want to play in Philadelphia will go to Philadelphia. Players who want to play in Miami will go to play Miami. I think, offering the money part of the thing, and you kind of have to put away from the location aspect. I think you have to separate those two things.
I think baseball does a good job of that, too.
Yes, and I think they do. You look at the Detroit Tigers, they were able to make some signings this offseason. The Rangers as well. So I think teams have made moves that are in smaller markets, but it's just you have to make it so more teams are in the free agency market or active free agency. I think there are plenty of teams. I don't think the Royals were buyers at all.
Literally since they won the World Series, they haven't.
They've always been They've always been small ball, not really analytical. That's fine, but you still got to spend and build a good team. You can't just go into the tank. And I'm not thinking about teams right now off the top of my head, but there are numerous teams that are not willing to spend. And listen, if you want to be the Tampa Bay Rays and not spend, but you're going to be competitive, I support that. But there are way too many teams that are way too happy below 500, not spending, and then go into the draft to try to, tank.
It's those 8 teams 8 to 10 teams we talked about earlier. The Pirates, they haven't been good since McCutchen was there. The Orioles, they haven't been good since they had Machado and Chris Davis when he was actually a good player. The Cleveland Guardians, they were good a few years ago when Bieber was the Cy Young and Lindor was doing his thing and Jose Ramirez and all them. The Marlins haven't been good in their entire history, basically. The A's, they're a decent team year in, year out, but they're never a team that's going to compete for a World Series. The Rockies suck. They've sucked for a while. The Tigers were good in 2014 when they made the World Series. The Royals, 2015. The Twins, they've been okay. The Diamondbacks haven't been good since 2001. So it's just these teams that are not willing to go out and spend money, and it comes back full circle to the owners. If you're not going to support baseball, maybe, and this is going to be an extremely hot take, maybe MLB should force you to sell the team.
I don't think that's that hot of a take. You look at the fan bases from all those teams you listed, that's all they say on Twitter. It's sell the team, right? Like,
Yeah.
If you're not going to put money into it, that's the reason I don't think we should redistribute the wealth, because we shouldn't, give these teams who aren't willing to be good a chance to be good. They should just spend the money because they can.
The biggest example of that, and we've already talked about the Mets, but the Mets sell the team, and then it changes their entire trajectory of the franchise. They sell to the richest man in baseball currently, and he goes out and spends big bucks. And so, if you're one of these other teams and you're a fan and you're upset, I completely understand it. If you're the owner, either put up or shut up or get out. Like, it's really as simple as that.
Yeah, and we're going to go to some comments here because the YouTube is popping. John Roach, shout out our buddy Roach, he asked, how will this impact free agents who have yet to sign? And I think that's fascinating because we talked about if they got a deal done, was it going to be NBA style where in 5 minutes everyone signs? They had all these under-the-table deals. Now I'm not so sure what's going to happen, right? You wonder if teams in this process are wavering. We saw Derek Jeter obviously leave the Marlins, and there are some reports that was over not getting enough money to spend. So, Mike, I'll go to you with that because I think that is something that's fascinating, and I don't really know if we will have a true answer until this thing gets done.
Well, I think if the players are able to raise the collective bargaining tax, I think the bigger teams might be more willing to spend on the better players. I think teams that have already spent this offseason might go after a guy like Carlos Correa or the other players left on the free agency market. But I don't think it shifts it that much. I don't think this lockout has changed the player Carlos Correa's and all those on the free agency market. And at the end of the day, the players are pushing for teams to be able to spend more. So I don't think there is a reality where Carlos Correa gets less money after the lockout. I understand you're losing games and teams are losing revenue, but I still think the value that Carlos Correa and all these other players bring to the table still stands. So I don't think it impacts them greatly, but I still think it adds a level to it, especially if the player is able to raise his collective bargaining tax.
Yeah, the biggest thing that I'm thinking of is these teams that have pending free agents, like the Giants with Chris Bryant, like the Braves with Freddie Freeman. How does this affect them? These players, it may be better for, a team like the Giants or the Braves that these players are going, holy cow, what am I going to do? I already have a house here. Like, okay, am I going to really pack up and move across the country when camp starts in 20 days?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, actually.
It's a tough spot for the players that are free agents.
These players that are potential free agents that, maybe are starting to get a little up there in age. Bryant's already 29. Freeman's already past 30. Are they really going to leave these franchises right now when, there's so much uncertainty going on?
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point. It's really hard to say how it affects the free agency market right now because you have no idea where the talks are going to go and what direction they are going to go in. But I think that just adds to the uncertainty. There's so much uncertainty around this situation. I want to change gears a little bit here. You talk about uncertainty. Now that we're in this position with the talks and now that games are being canceled, I think the negotiations are going to change. The players originally said they wouldn't agree to an expanded playoff format if games were canceled. So you add that. Are they going to keep the promise or not? The talks are going to change, and things they might have agreed to before games were canceled might now change. So I think as we talk about uncertainty with how the free agent market will be affected, there's also uncertainty on all levels of these negotiations.
And let's talk about, the last two things that have happened. It was the press conference of Rob Manfred, and then the players kind of rebutted with the union, reps and Max Scherzer, Andrew Miller on stage. So Rob Manfred goes at 5 o'clock today, and he officially, announces the first two series will be canceled. He said it from a very owner's perspective where he put a lot of the blame on the players. He said the owners were willing, the two sides, you need two sides to get a deal done. And he said something that irked a lot of people, including me. He said the last 5 years it's been very difficult for the league from a revenue perspective. The Twitter fact checkers blew this one up, and rightfully so. In 2019, the last obviously pre-COVID season, the revenues increased for a 17th straight season, $10.7 billion. So, I don't understand where him and where these owners are getting this from. But if they're truly taking the stance that they've been getting killed, I don't see there's any scenario where they can really come together at the current rate that they're, apart from.
Well, COVID happened in 2020, not 2017.
Not 5 years ago, yeah.
So, in 2020, yes, they took a hit. And last year, they weren't as big as they were in 2019. I believe they were on $4 or $5 billion. $4 or $5 billion? Oh, my gosh, you poor thing.
Well, I think difficult for them is obviously a different difficult than, we can understand. And I think that makes it all the more frustrating if you're a regular fan. You want to watch baseball at the end of the day, and we understand maybe it's been difficult for you given your circumstance as an owner. And, we're not businessmen, and we understand that the business world works differently, and there's a lot more moving parts to it. But at the end of the day, you've got to be able to come to a closer negotiation. Like, the fact these two sides are so far apart, it's like you're not magically going to get to the middle. One side's just going to have to cave. And the owners are taking that gamble that the players are going to be willing to cave, and that's why they're not giving any ground to the players. At the end of the day, the owners have the leverage. They shouldn't, but they do, and that's the sad situation we're in.
So we've talked about this already a few times, and I'm going to disagree with you here, Mike. I think the players actually have more leverage, and this may be a little bit of a hot take, and I don't know where other people are sitting on this idea. However, with the players, they know, and no one knows besides the owners what that game is,
magic number.
Where the magic number where the owners are going to go, holy crap, we're losing money now. The players, they're not necessarily losing money, they're just not making money right now.
Well, but
the owners
this is what I'll say.
No, hold on. The owners at some point will lose money. So it depends on how long the players are willing to hold out for. It really, really affects the guys that are, rookies or still on minimum contracts. However, some of these other guys, and I know we talked about this, it's the players are fighting for the lower level guys and whatnot. But if the players can really wait this out, it's going to benefit them so much more in the long run. Whether or not they're willing to do that, whether or not some of them are willing to risk their livelihoods at this current moment. But the owners at some point, if the players hold out for as long as they possibly can, The owners are going to cave at some point, and I think the players are going to win a lot of what they want.
This is what my argument is. Earlier in the show, did you not say that 2/3 of the MLB is making less than $1 million?
Yes.
Then how is that majority of the MLB supposed to hold out when they need to literally play to live? Like, they need to do their job to make money for their families, to pay for their living situation, for food, for all of that. They have to play to actually make a living. It's not, when you look at the other third that's making over $1 million, yeah, maybe that's the case. They can hold out. But when we're talking about billionaires, if they're losing money, like, they're still billionaires. Like,
yes,
if
but
the
they're
2/3 of the
still
MLB,
billionaires.
but Danny, if the 2/3 of the MLB is holding out, they're losing money by not making money. It's the same argument. It's the same thing with the owners.
So,
they're losing by not making.
let me, and first off, if you want to join this conversation, 718-817-2750 is the number to call. And here's the thing. I can see where both you are coming from. I think if the players are in a united front 110%, I think they have the leverage. I personally don't believe that can be the case. I just think you have too many guys at the lower levels that will get really hurt. And, maybe Tony Clark talked about united front. That is what they need 100%. If they don't have it, the owners have the ability to wait them out. But if they do, I think they could really cause, some troubles with the players. I think that is what it comes down to. What we've seen so far is the players haven't been willing to blink. I think we've seen reports they're willing to cancel a season. I don't know how smart that is. I don't know how real that is. But you do get the sense as of right now they are all in together.
And you talk about unity, Ryan. It's so much easier for 30 owners to be united.
It's a great point.
Than 1,200 Major League Baseball players plus the entire minor leagues. And although all those players aren't making decisions, the players at the top, the players like Max Scherzer that are helping make these decisions, they have to look out for all those players. And at a certain point, the players are going to have to come to an understanding where we have serious players, 2/3 of the MLB, like you said, Danny, that making under $1 million, and all those minor leaguers that need to make a living. And there's going to, if anything, the owners have the leverage because they can push the players to that point.
So my counter back to that is I really don't see a situation where the entire season gets canceled. At some point, they're going to get paid, and they
yes,
were getting
but
paid.
they're not getting paid for the games they missed, like Rob Manfred said.
Yes.
Well, we will see.
We will see because the players are fighting for that. However, the Players Association also came out in their press conference and said they're going to do everything that they can to help these guys out. Tony Clark said they would be potentially offering stipends, medical benefits, anything that they can do to keep these players united. So I don't think it's that unrealistic to say that these players are going to be united and stand together. And going back to what I was saying earlier is the difference between not making money and losing money, I think, is a really big deal. Yes, they still gotta support their families, and some of them are definitely supporting greater family than just their immediate family that they're living with right now. However, personally, and I can't say I'm gonna put myself in their shoes because I'm not in their shoes. I don't know what it's like to have that amount of money and what you do with that amount of money. However, if someone told me, hey, you're not going to make any money for 2 months, but when we come back, you're going to make a lot more and you're going to be way better off for the rest of your career. How many of these guys in these younger levels are 38-year-olds, 36, 7-year-olds that, this is their final year? For those guys, it really sucks. However, for the majority of the minor league and the majority of the guys that these issues are stemming from, there's still these younger players that still have an entire career laid out in front of them.
Yeah, so I think what we look at here, you mentioned what Tony Clark said. I want to go over what Rob Manfred said today. He said some stuff about the fans. The concern of our fans are at the very top of our consideration list, which is an insane quote. The number to call, 718-817-2750. I believe Mike Messina is now on the line, and he wants to talk about that comment from Rob Manfred.
Guys, what's up? Just got out of class. Excuse me if it was already talked about. Just want to get your thoughts on Manfred kind of opening up this press conference and smiling, laughing after pretty much every question that was asked to him. And then obviously a lot of people referring back to him calling the World Series trophy a piece of metal. So do you guys think he is the guy for this job? I mean, my answer is no, and I'm sure you guys are kind of thinking the same thing. But really, what are your thoughts on him kind of taking this as a joke?
Yeah, I'll go for a little bit. I think it's just so fitting to see the commissioner smile and that's circulated on Twitter, when there's games being canceled. You are the commissioner of baseball and games being canceled, and you're smiling and I just think that's just not fitting. It's fitting given the situation of how the lockouts went, but if you're the commissioner, you have to be serious about the situation. And secondly, to answer your question, he's not the guy for this job. We've known that for a while, ever since the 2020 season, and you go from potentially 112 games being paid to 60, almost cut in half. He's definitely not the guy for this.
And, you got Marcus Stroman, who's a big presence on baseball Twitter, saying, Rob Manfred got to get out of here. I think it's hilarious. This guy, we've known this for a while, like you said, Mike. And Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA, has done an amazing job. And, Roger Goodell gets a lot of slack for what he's done. A lot of people don't like him. However, we talked about this pre-show. The what he's done for the game of football is amazing. He's grown the game exponentially. Since Manfred has got in, viewership has just plummeted down the tank, and a lot of people are very angry with what baseball is doing, and that, I think it's coming to a boiling point right now with this whole lockout.
Yeah, Mike, appreciate the call, and that was kind of where we were going. You would think the way Rob Manfred carried himself today, that it's all fun and games, right? He was the one who came out and said, if we cancel a game, it will be devastating for our sport. He did that today, and he looked like he had a good time doing it. I know the one thing I'll say, people sometimes, when they're nervous, they're awkward, they do let out a laugh and a smile, just, whatever their body will let out, and so maybe that's what it is.
Yeah, but I mean, if you're the commissioner of baseball,
he was
you need to
very
be
happy-go-lucky.
You need to be a little bit more composed than that. You didn't see these players and the MLBPA and everything. You're the commissioner of baseball because you're incredibly intelligent and you do a good job. And as of right now, if what you're saying is the truth, it leads me to question his intelligence on some type of a level, and it leads me to believe that he's doing a horrendous job.
Yeah, and I think just when you've got your commissioner smiling up there, he's canceling games, and then he's, as the audacity to say, the concerns of our fans are at the very top of our consideration list.
It's a slap in the face.
As a fan, you're offended. It's like,
yeah,
I just want to watch baseball. I don't care how it's watched. Even during the 2020 season, I talked about how it's a Mickey Mouse year. I love to watch the game. I want to watch 9 innings of the best teams play against each other. So the fact we're not getting that, and the commissioner, the leader of Major League Baseball, is representing the league in that way. And I know he's there to represent the owners. He's still got to represent the fans. And the fact he's saying that he is, when obviously he isn't, it's really disheartening.
I'd almost have more respect for him if he just came out and was like, I'm in the best interest of the owners, than to just say and play with, be pity. The fans are all we care about, when none of the fans want what you're doing. None of them. So I think really it is just a slap in the face to everyone here. And that's why when Tony Clark spoke, just to, transition here, I think it was very important to see how the tones in the press conference were different. Every answer by whoever answered it, whether it was Clark or Scherzer or Miller, was very serious. They talked about being willing to do this as long as it takes. They're united, everything like that. They made you, not that we already weren't rooting for the players, but if you watch both press conferences today, I don't know anyone who came away thinking Rob Manfred and the owners were on the right side of things.
Well, Manfred said, he in his press conference, he said, no, this wasn't our best and final offer. It's not the deal that we're saying this is the final deal on the table. Well, why wouldn't it be? Why wouldn't you put out your best offer that, okay, guys, hey, look, really, this is the best we're going to be able to do. If you don't want to have a season this year, do that. Even if you're lying, just say that. He comes out and says, this wasn't the best we can do. This was the best we could do before we cancel games. Does that sound like you have the best interest of the fans in mind when you're saying that? Doesn't to me.
Yeah, and I think, like I said earlier, the owners went into this knowing they need to cancel games to gain leverage.
Yep.
And I think it's obvious if you read into it. I think that's just, if you read into it at all, I think that's very clear. And circling back to the Major League Baseball Players Association press conference, I think the seriousness, how prepared they were to be there, they had a plan. And if you fact check them, I think they check out. They were waiting for the MLB. They were there. They show up. They spend their time to make these negotiations, and they play their hand completely. They're saying what they want, what they want with the cap, and what they want with the pre-arbitration bonus. They have all that there, but The owners have been the people that have not been talking to them since December. They've been holding things back. They've been playing the chess games of, we're going to cancel these games, give you our best and final offer, but it's not really our best and final offer. The owners are in control, and the players just want what's best for them and all the players. That really is what you're watching. They are the game. And the owners are in control of the situation, and when you watch the players' conference, you can really feel for them because they tried to make the game better, but it's almost like defeat, like the owners aren't really giving us any room. And we haven't talked about this. We can kind of change here, but I thought one thing that really was interesting was the narrative MLB was creating. That we talked about it earlier in the show, I think to start it off, that we thought a deal was going to be done because there's progress, all these tweets that they are close to a deal, that there might be a deal as close as like whatever hour it was. And then you get to the press conference and they basically say that was not the case. We were very far apart. We were always very far apart. We don't know where that narrative came from, because then the MLB comes out and says the players backed off last minute or they had cold feet and all this to make it look bad on the players. And it just shows you the narrative shaping the MLB's trying to do to make this seem like it was closer and the players pulled out, when in reality, these two sides have never been far apart. And when you hear the player side versus Rob Manfred's press conference, the two could not look more different. The players look great, and Rob Manfred comes out looking awful.
I mean, Dan Hallam, who is the guy that went back and forth between the owners and the players' kind of rooms in this conference room, he became a legend on Twitter because he went back 12 times. So, like, we really did think it was coming together. Then I think when you get worried today, it's when, you know, the owners release how the players have kind of switched up their tune. Then you have, I think, Alex Wood, other guys came out and were like, what are they talking about? We have the same thoughts as yesterday. They are getting changed. And I think that's when, you know, it hit me today. I was in class and I saw that. That's when it really hit me. We're not going to get 162 games this year. And that was just a really sad thing to see. And, you know, to kind of go full circle here and to wrap up in just a little bit, I think we've laid everything out on the table, right? We've kind of went over this whole timeline here. We've went back and forth, what they've been discussing, what's needed to be said, everything like that. I want to ask both you guys, where do they go from here? How can we get a season? Where can they meet in the middle here? How do we get Major League Baseball to be played without, let's say March 8th is now the current deadline. I know we probably don't think that's attainable, but let's say in a perfect world, they don't cancel any more games. How do we, Michael, start with you, go about that?
I mean, the sad thing is that in order for games to be stopped being canceled, the players are going to have to cave. Because I think the owners understand that more games will be canceled, and that's how they're going to continue to push the players. If you want games right now, the players are going to have to cave. And as good as that might be for the fan, for the greater good of the sport and the long term of the sport, it might not be good. The players are going to have to give a little wiggle room, because I think, if anything, the owners seem like they're holding their ground a little too much, and they're willing to cancel games. I think if you asked me 2 weeks ago, I'd say the owners would be giving more wiggle room because the players were very firm on what they wanted, and they didn't seem like they're moving. But when their games are actually being canceled and that reality sets in, the players are going to have to give up more of their side than they probably would have hoped, unless it becomes that late in the season that the owners realize they're losing money. But I think the players are going to have to maybe give up a little to get back to the season. If that's good for the long term of the game, I don't know, but at least baseball will be back. But it's just a crummy situation that the owners, feel like they are in this type of control, and the players are the ones that are going to, in the end, probably have to give up a little.
Yeah, I haven't seen what the players' original proposal was, but from everything that I've been seeing and reading and hearing, they haven't really stepped off much from what they wanted originally. They've already apparently gotten a couple things that they've requested for, but the biggest things are the things that we talked about already, and that's not what they're getting.
Just to cut you off real quick, I believe one thing I saw was that pre-arbitration bonus pool that now is at 85. I believe it opened at 115.
115.
So they've moved down $30 million.
So that's just one example of the players coming back, and it still hasn't been enough.
Exactly. So in a perfect world, they split everything 50-50, and they go right in the middle.
And we unfortunately
don't live in a perfect world, so that's probably not going to happen. Realistically, if I was a betting man, I would say the owners or the players are going to have to come down by quite a significant margin. And, maybe there's something where they can, hey, take a little bit of this and give us a little bit of that. Maybe it's the minimum salary where they're not that far off. Maybe they agree to the minimum salary a little bit more and get some competitive bargain tax in there, or some of the other stuff that they're requesting. However, the players are definitely going to have to come down unless, like Mike said, they somehow hold out, which it's a lot easier said than done when you're relying on this money for a livelihood. However, unless they get to a point where the owners go, holy crap, we're losing a significant sum of money and we cannot afford this, the players are going to have to come down, I believe, a significant margin.
Yeah, my thing is we don't know this magic number of games that the owners are willing to miss, and I think until we know what that is and until we get close to that, I can't see a way where they give in, because the owners as a whole, right? If you count the 10-ish owners we've kind of talked about, the small market teams, do they really care as much about the players as getting major league product on the field in 2022 for 162? No. They don't. And it's very, prevalent that is the case, which is why I just think in the end, they definitely destroyed the last two CBAs. This is the one where the players have showed the most resistance at fighting back. You commend them a ton. Mike, you said one thing, how in the long term it could be best. I'd argue if the players accept whatever, it's good in the short term and then just really bad in the long term.
That's what
I completely agree.
Because I think, we've seen reports, they're willing to miss a year. Now, I don't know how logistic that is, but they do know that they're at a crossroads. Because if they give in again, this is 3 straight CBAs where they give to the owners. There's no coming back.
And that's what my point was. Short term, the fans will love it. We get baseball back, but long term, this was the point where the players really could have made some room. Are you going to do this again in 4 or 5 years? Are we going to keep doing this?
Yeah.
If it's going to happen, let's do it now and let's really make some change in the game.
And I personally, and I've been arguing for that the entire show, is I would really like to see that. And, as a fan of baseball, I would love to see baseball right now. However, realistically, I think even for the fans, the product on the field will be better in the future if the players really hold out and fight for what they're fighting for. We'll get better players around for longer. Maybe we'll get some of these players that, like we mentioned with Aaron Judge. He'll be, 32 before he receives his first free agency offer? I know the Yankees fans are arguing for him to get re-signed right now. However, who knows if that actually comes. And for these guys upcoming in the future, these prospects and everything, it'll be a lot better for them when they finally reach MLB and finally reach free agency.
Yeah, I think there's just a million questions that we have right now, and the MLB over this stretch has given us so little answers. And I think, just to give it to you guys a final time here, that is what is most frustrating about the sport that we love.
Yeah, I mean, you said it perfectly there. It's what's frustrating about the sport. And we've been here before. I think, there's a graphic when I was watching ESPN the other day of the list of the times there's been strikes and lockouts, and there's been way too many games canceled over the years. And there has been progress each of those times that's happened. You think back to the original strike in 1972. There was no free agency at that point, I believe, and the players have gotten a lot more control of the game since then, and this is just going to be on their step there. Either way, I think the players will gain something from where they were in 2017, but it's just how much, and that's what the frustrating is. You want baseball, but at the same time, you want what's better for the game.
My last and final little statistic that I'll give you, Mike, you mentioned baseball has been canceled way too many games. In their history, they've canceled over 1,700 games. Roughly, more or less, there's about 2,400 games per season. If the first 2 months of Major League Baseball are canceled, we will have lost an entire season worth of baseball games. It's really disappointing. I really want to see baseball back, and I really want to see the players get treated a little bit more fairly in the future and for the rest of baseball history.
And listen, I'm in a speech class with Danny, and he gave that speech 3 times. So the numbers definitely check out there, and it's something you look at, and you're just like, damn, baseball.
Good to see the speech class paying off.
Yeah,
right?
There it is. The numbers are ingrained in his head there. But I think, we've laid out everything nicely here. I think that's going to do it for this emergency live Nosebleeds. Who knows when we come back? Hopefully it's with a deal. Hopefully it's with some baseball. But I hope you had a good night tuning in to this Nosebleeds, a production of WFUV Sports.
And thank you to Alex Wolz and Pat Amateur, our producers.